This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey alongside Brian Tripp. We got a great Week 5 breakdown for you here. Some really good, interesting games to break down along the conference. We'll play a few games. Concern or no concern with a few teams as they had some interesting results here in week number 5. A game of real or fake. Some teams up and coming, maybe we did not see right now being undefeated this deep into the season. We'll break down some big upsets around college football. How does that impact the Big Ten Conference as well as the college football race is really starting to heat up? Of course, we have our Big Ten rankings as well. A great show here for you. Thank you for joining us. And as you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, it's not only a college football Big Ten specific pod, it is a MLB postseason pod here. We are recording this on Monday. I mean, I hope, by the way, my Mets are in the playoffs. Doubleheader to get in. This guy over here, Mr. Red October, is back. Tripp, look, I hope we get some playoff baseball along with some good Big Ten football here. Make for quite an October.
I love this time of year. I think it's the best time of year for sports fans. Every team in the NFL is 2-2, I think, after the first 4 weeks. But you have hockey will start, basketball will start here in a couple of weeks, and then of course postseason, Major League Baseball, and now when you get into October, college football, you start to get those playoff races shaping up that we're going to have this year. And obviously, as you talked about, some games this weekend, I think outside the Big Ten more, that really impact the landscape of college football moving forward for the rest of the season.
Absolutely. And let's start with a game that you were at and we all were intently watching here. That was Penn State, Illinois, top 20 matchup. James Franklin all week was calling for whiteout energy. From the TV trip, at least to me, it looked like a pretty close to a whiteout there. You were on the field compared to a normal whiteout for Penn State, and this was more of an impromptu sort of event. How did the fan atmosphere feel on this night game in Beaver Stadium?
Well, it was basically a whiteout, even though it may not have been officially termed one. The whiteout energy was very high. I wear like a headset on the sideline to do my sideline reporting, and I had the volume turned up as high as it would go so I could hear. That's how loud it was at Beaver Stadium. I think there were moments when Illinois was at the line of scrimmage and trying to change the play, and they got called for a false start and had to use a timeout. It's as loud pre-play as I've heard that stadium. Now, obviously, there's big moments, big plays throughout the game when the crowd erupts, but as loud pre-play in certain situations, right up there with, at the infamous Michigan timeout before the first snap of the game. But it was right up there with that. And the crowd, absolutely. James Franklin said it's 7 plays that the crowd impacted, 7 negative plays for Illinois. The crowd absolutely played a significant part in that game. It seemed like early, right? Illinois came out, went right down the field, and you thought that was going to temper that emotion. But ever since that opening drive, Tom Allen's defense was unbelievable for Penn State. And you come out of this, it's a 21-7 game, a game that was a 1-score tie game at half, 14-7 much of the way. You're like, when's Penn State going to put it away? It felt like it was one of those Big Ten games where possessions were at a premium. Teams wanted to run the football, and it was physical. It was really physical, and that's my biggest takeaway is how physical Penn State was. And it almost looked like they've had so many great players with McSorley and Barkley and Dotson, Godwin. But this was the most physical I've seen a James Franklin team during his tenure at Penn State. And to do that coupled with the talent that they have, I was really, even though the score was close, I was really impressed with Penn State.
And to provide some stats to that point, you talk about physicality. Penn State ran the ball for 239 yards. You had Katron Allen over 100 yards, Nick Singleton over 90 yards. Both ran the ball really, really effectively. Tyler Warren now, I don't know what he can't do. Maybe field goal kicking at this point. But when it comes to running the ball, making decisions, throwing the ball, we've seen him catching the ball. He has done it all. But not only offensively, Penn State was physical, but also defensively, where you look, they sacked Luke Altmaier 7 times. They got after him. Like you said, that crowd really helped kind of, I think, push them
Mhm.
push that defense along here and maybe make that offensive line for Illinois slow to get off the ball. Those 7 sacks tied for the most against a top 25 team for Penn State in 15 years. So that defense was really playing well, especially in the second half. That's one thing we've seen from Penn State here. They have been leaky at times in the first half in all 4 of their games, but in the second half, there was no doubt they slammed the door as soon as halftime does end, where in this game against Illinois on Saturday night, they allowed a grand total in the second half of just 39 yards, took the ball away 2 times, and allowed 0 points. You mentioned the crowd impact. You mentioned the score. Penn State was an 18-point favorite. We both thought they would cover that number. And now you're looking at a 21-7 win here for Penn State, where it was a 1-score game or tied for most of it. Do you come out of this game trip concerned about Penn State with how close it was and maybe some of the warts you saw? Or is it still, hey, the score was close, but really Penn State dominated, and there's not a lot that I feel bad about now going into this week when UCLA comes to town?
I think it's the second of those. I think there's no concern. I thought the physicality was really important for them. They outgained Illinois 374 yards to 219. That the run game was so good. And that score, it becomes a 3-score game if they don't have the problems that they had in the kicking game, missing 2 very makeable field goals, Sanders Sahedek. And there was at one point, it was a 14-7 game, and Penn State was driving, and they went for it on a 4th and 4, where typically to make it a 2-score game, you would kick a field goal. I think the reason they went for it, as much as trying to be aggressive, was that James Franklin did not trust his kicking game in that spot and trusted his offense instead. So I think the score, if you just look at the score at the end, and Illinois is a top 20 team. Remember, like people say, oh, they didn't blow them out by enough. Illinois is a top 20 team. I think it's nitpicking. And the score is not indicative of how good Penn State was. I thought Drew Aller missed a couple of throws, but it was slippery on the field. It didn't rain during the day, but the field was really wet, and it definitely impacted conditions. And then there's some bizarre officiating during that game as well.
Yeah, the officiating we'll get to here in a second was, we'll say, not great. I think that contributed to a closer game than it should have been. I thought there were some dumb penalties, jumping off sides, in areas that you just can't do that at points in the game.
Yep.
To give Illinois free play or give them a first down, inexcusable. I'm with you for the most part. I don't have a lot of concern for Penn State outside of what you mentioned, field goal kicking, because we've seen like college kickers, right, is a term for a reason, because even if you have a really good college kicker, you still can't trust him that much because he still is so young. And now when you look at Penn State, they do have a kicking problem. And when you have USC, or you're going to USC in 2 weeks, you have Ohio State coming to town in about a month or so. I expect those games to be close, which means it could come down to a field goal attempt or not. And like you said, Penn State kind of at one point said, screw it, we're just going to go for it on 4th down. That is 3 points possibly off the board now. If you don't convert on that 3rd down, you're missing a field goal, or a 4th down, I should say. That just takes points off the board and makes it harder to win these closer games. That is the only area of concern for me that I really do have. Because you know the roster better than I do, Chip. You're on the team every day. Is there an answer for Penn State? Is there another kicker they can kind of rely on? It's not the first time Sahedek has had trouble kicking the ball. Is there a quick fix?
Yeah, Sahedek's really talented too. He's got a strong leg. He gets the ball up in the air really fast, and he is one of my favorite players to be around on the team. But they had a 3-man competition during camp, and it was close. So Ryan Barker appeared to be the guy, and he came in and kicked PAT at the end of the game to make it 21-7. Ryan Barker would be the next man up, it looks like, and Chase Meyer was also a part of that. All are lefties, which is unique. So Sahedek, Barker, and Meyer are all lefties. But it looks like Ryan Barker is probably going to get a shot at it next.
So if you're a UCLA fan, that's something to keep an eye on in this game coming up. If you're a USC fan and Ohio State fan, I think that's definitely a reason to watch big noon kickoff this upcoming Saturday to see if Penn State can find a replacement at kicker and figure out those problems here before those games do arise. We also did talk about officiating, Trip, and you have a very unique job being on the sideline for these games. It's awesome. Like you said, you get to see the environment, but also you get to talk to James Franklin in an intimate setting, maybe more than anybody else does. Do you want to tell us kind of maybe a one-in-a-lifetime experience you did experience here on Saturday night?
Yeah, so he was out discussing some plays with the officials after the end of the first half, and I'm waiting for him to come off into the Penn State locker room. And he goes up the tunnel. I usually interview him at about the goal line before going into the tunnel. And Catherine Tappan was there for NBC, and she interviewed Brett Bielema. So sometimes I'll wait and he talks to the TV reporter first, but the only thing standing between James Franklin and getting to address his team and get into the locker room and clean things up is me. Sometimes there's that heat of the moment, but he's great to deal with. He honestly is great to deal with. But he's yelling at the officials coming off, and he has a couple of words for one of the linesmen right before he gets to me. And I'm like, okay, I know I have to keep this one question and get him out of here. So I ask him, Coach, great finish with the defensive stop at the end of the first half. What's important to continue that momentum in the second half? Real softball, open-ended question. Don't bring up the officiating. And he said, we're playing hard, we're playing well, and we have to clean up the legitimate penalties, which has been a recurring theme for them, right? You're talking about concern for Penn State. The concerns are all fixable things. It's a kicking game, and the offside and alignment penalties that they're getting on defense. But he said, we have to clean up the legitimate penalties, not the, and am I allowed to say this?
Say it. We're going to play the audio.
Not the bullshit ones. You have the audio? You got to play the audio.
So to hear it live here, this is Brian Tripp getting ready for halftime, asking James Franklin a question, courtesy of course, Penn State Radio Network.
He is still having a long conversation with the linesman. And now he's going to have a shorter conversation, but a well-meaning one with Brian Tripp.
Coach, important defensive stop there at the end of the first half. What do you want to see going into the second?
Yeah, we got to clean up the penalties on defense, the legitimate penalties, not the bullshit ones. But besides that, I think we're playing damn good defense. That was a huge stop before the half.
Coach, good luck.
Thank you. Am I allowed to say bullshit?
Has that
He was just speaking for 110,000 people there.
Has he ever reacted like that? Because, I watch a lot of James Franklin press conferences, and usually he takes the diplomatic approach even when he's frustrated. That's the first time I've ever heard him truly, I'll say what's on his mind when it comes to officiating. Have you ever seen him in that, rare form like that? Holy cow.
Yeah, that's actually the type of person that's his personality, honestly. I think people see this very measured, very thoughtful coach when he speaks typically. But that was James Franklin, the funny, the personable, the fiery. That's him. It is. And I actually think it's a side of him that he could show more. And I think fans would really enjoy it. But he's so intelligent and he's so thoughtful usually in the way he delivers any type of message. So it was cool. I don't think we got an FCC fine for it. It was cool in the moment. It was cool to actually capture that. And then he, of course, it kind of went a little viral and he was asked about it after the game. But I'm not sure we'll get it again, but it was good to get it in that moment.
I like the politeness at the end. Am I allowed to say that? I was asking for forgiveness. That was very funny. Oh man, that is great. That is absolutely great. Brian Tripp, baby. Brian Tripp right there, ladies and gentlemen, getting the best out of James Franklin, or maybe the officials did that as well. So overall, no real concern finally here with Penn State here going forward. I don't really think so. Again, close game. I think there are a lot of factors, like you said, that are easily fixable. Maybe outside of kicker. I am definitely worried about kicker going forward here for Penn State. Otherwise, the penalties, some of Drew Allar's decision making, I think will be fixable pretty quickly here. No concern at the end.
No concern. I think they're legitimate and they are a legitimate playoff team. They're very good.
How about concern with USC? Now, if you look at the box score, you say, well, they won by 17. What is the problem here, Ryan? And the problem was USC was trailing to Wisconsin at one point 21-10, and the turnover bug yet again struck USC. We saw them lose to Michigan in part because they turned the ball over. You had a really costly pick six by Miller Moss to Will Johnson that really kind of turned the tide of the game and made it tough for USC at the end to kind of get back in it. I know they lost on a big run, but still, that was a free 7 points that Michigan definitely needed at the end to win the game. And the reason why USC didn't get bit 2 weeks in a row by the injury, by the turnover bug, I should say, they turned the ball over 3 times, is because Wisconsin's just not that good. They're not that good. So going forward here with Penn State coming to town in 2 weeks, with Notre Dame at the end of the season coming to town here, is there a turnover concern trip with you, or is this just kind of, it happens, they'll still be fine going forward?
I think they need to clean up the mistakes, but I think you can see how Miller Moss is playing as well as any quarterback in the country right now, and their offense is really dangerous. Zachariah Branch had a muff and some questionable decision-making in the punt return game for USC. But Jacoby Lane, 10 catches, 105 yards, 2 touchdowns. Miller Moss with the 4 touchdowns. I am not concerned. I think it was a team that was a little bit sloppy, but because of how well they are playing offensively to overcome that, they're so dangerous right now. And it's not just Moss and Lane. I mean, I think he completed passes to like 10 different receivers, and they have so many weapons. The running game, Woody Marks, has been good enough. And then all the questions about their defense, and you're down 21-10 at halftime, and they pitch a shutout in the second. I know it's Wisconsin. I get it, but for them to also pitch a shutout in the second half defensively, that I am not concerned with USC. I'm actually impressed the way they came back and dominated the second half.
I am concerned just because now, like, if this is a theme, like if you have 5 turnovers in 2 games, and that happens against Penn State in 2 weeks, you're not winning the game. And so they've already lost 1 game on the road, in part because of turnovers. And I don't like the fact that it popped up again here against Wisconsin. And again, I think they won this game handily, in part because just Wisconsin's not that good, and injuries offensively, unfortunately, with their quarterback, amongst others, just makes it more difficult for the Badgers. Like, if this continues here in 2 weeks, they're not winning the game. And I think that's why it's important, is because they have, like you mentioned, they have the talent to win and beat Penn State. They have the talent to run the table. They should be, or at least match up well with Penn State and Notre Dame. Like you mentioned, these receivers, they have 4 or 5 guys in terms of size, speed, athleticism, reliability. I mean, some of those completions that Miller Moss had, the catches, the difficulty of catches they had to make along the sideline with defenders draped all over them, it was impressive as hell. I think right now the only thing that can derail USC is the turnover bug, and that's just what has me concerned, where it was not cleaned up after USC's loss to Michigan, and in fact, it only got worse here with an extra turnover compared to last week. That's my concern.
I just think they're so talented that I get where you're coming from, but the way they dominated that second half, 14 points in the third quarter, 14 in the fourth, 28-0 second half. Branch had 4 catches for 44 yards. You go along with Lane. Hudson 4 for 42. Deuce Robinson had a touchdown, 2 catches, 40 yards. Woody Marks in the passing game, 4 catches, 29 yards. Kyle Ford, 2 for 24. Walker Lyons, 2 for 12. Quentin Joyner, 1 for 10. And Cale Eldridge, 1 for 2. They got a lot of weapons.
That they do. And we know in a Lincoln Riley offense, he can spread it out and he'll make sure those boys get fed. All right. So I'm concerned with USC here. You're not. How about Michigan? They're up 24-3 going into the fourth quarter against Minnesota. Good matchup in terms of Michigan can run the ball well, and Minnesota struggles to stop the run. And all of a sudden, you blink, touchdown, punt return, touchdown. All of a sudden, Minnesota's right back in this game. Michigan ends up winning here by 3. Do you have any concern about the Wolverines coming out of this game?
Yeah, absolutely. And also fortunate to win this game by 3 because Minnesota recovered an onside kick that was called offside, and it was incorrectly called offside. PJ Fleck's team had all the momentum, should have had the football, but there's some real concerns with Michigan. They're just so one-dimensional offensively. They're still good defensively, but they're so one-dimensional offensively. They can't put a game away. Now, in this game, with the defense they have, you expect that defense, when you have a 24-3 lead going into the fourth quarter, you can talk all you want about their offense, but that's on the defense to let that slip. But they are so one-dimensional offensively and they clearly have taken a step back defensively and in the physicality department. They have some real concerns moving forward.
When it comes to officiating, I'm with you, and I'm glad you pointed it out. That is not only horrendous at the time that the penalty was called, it wasn't close. Like, if you go back and look at the still shot of Minnesota's onside attempt, I mean, I would say everyone is behind the line by about a yard. Like, it's not even close. That is the one thing that does bother me when it comes to officiating overall, because it has been a problem in college football, in the Big Ten and other conferences as well. If it's not obvious, I hate when the referees inject themselves on a questionable call in a big moment and aren't sure. And unless it is clear and obvious and there's zero doubt, in that moment, I have no idea how you could throw a flag. Minnesota's recovery wiped away. Obviously, they don't recover the second time. Michigan holds on to win. But to your point about physicality and being one-dimensional, you're 100% right. And that's a concerning part from Michigan here is even though their bread is buttered when it comes to running the ball, and this Minnesota run defense has been leaky and struggled. I mean, they just gave up 206 yards individually to Caleb Johnson against Iowa last week. You look at Michigan as a team, ran for 155 yards, just 3.6 yards per carry. And Alex Orji, who now is supposed to be, I mean, he is the more dynamic option at quarterback, but they don't trust him to pass the ball, just 86 passing yards on 10 of 18. I know it was raining, so maybe that had a little bit to do with not passing it as much, but they showed against USC too. They don't want him throwing the ball whatsoever. But if he's not going to throw, at least have him be a threat with his legs, which is what he's supposed to be. And he ran trip on 9 carries for 12 yards. Not a threat in the run game, clearly not a threat in the pass game. And you look at this Michigan team, when they have to run the ball now consistently, they're really struggling to. And like you said, their defense right now couldn't hold the dam on what should have been an easy win. I'm with you. There is a lot of concern here for the Wolverines in terms of their running game, number one, but also their defense.
Well, they have no explosive ability offensively. Certainly you can create explosive plays in the run game. They did not this week. They did last week to come back and win that game against USC. But in this game, they averaged 4 yards per play. They only had 241 yards of offense. Their run defense, you can talk about defense. Their run defense was still really good. But as you pointed out, I think it was one of the first episodes we did, there was concern outside of Will Johnson in that secondary, and Minnesota threw the ball well to get back in this game. 27 of 41, 258 passing yards. Minnesota was the team that had the better stats in this game. Max Brosmer, 258 yards passing. They found something in the passing game against Michigan that propelled that comeback. So, yeah, there's real concern about Michigan, a one-dimensional offense, no ability to create explosive plays. Obviously, teams are loading the box because you're going to face the run, and they don't have enough semblance of a passing game to even threaten you in that passing game. And now defense has played well, but they got carved up by Texas. Miller Moss brought USC from behind, should have won that game. And now Max Brosmer brought Minnesota from behind with the passing game. So it's not as suffocating a defense as it was last year. There's real concern with Michigan.
And you look ahead now, Trip, to the next 2 games at Washington, at Illinois. 2 hard-nosed defenses that also have quarterbacks that can put the ball in the air and throw it all over the yard. We'll get to Washington Rutgers here in a second. It's really concerning. I mean, forget Oregon and forget Ohio State for a second. There's real concern here for Michigan with these next 2 games coming up here on the road at Washington, at Illinois. If they can come away, I mean, if they go 1-1, I'd say that's a win for the Wolverines right now, just with how they're playing. I don't think you can expect them to go on the road 2 games in a row with those matchups and come out victorious both times.
I'm glad you mentioned Illinois because we should have talked about this when we talked about Penn State, Illinois. I still am really impressed with the Illini. They just don't have the margin to overcome a deficit. Penn State played, despite the penalties, Penn State played a turnover-free game. They won the turnover margin 2-0. Illinois had been so proficient at taking care of the football all season. I still think that's a good Illinois team that's going to be in a lot of games. The thing with them is they just don't have the talent to overcome a deficit. They have to play even or ahead for the most part. And I think they ran into, despite Penn State having discipline issues with penalties, a Penn State team that does not make, and a quarterback in Drew Aller, who does not make the big mistake. I think you're right. That is a tough, tough stretch for Michigan coming up on the road and against teams that are going to pass the football.
It's going to be tough. Well, Illinois really fast because I think you're right. Outside of maybe Penn State, Ohio State, and Oregon, would you put USC in the category of maybe just too much talent for the Illinois to overcome, for the Illini to overcome? Like outside of those teams, 14, or I guess that would be 13 of the 18 Big Ten teams, Illinois matches up really well with and can win those games?
Any team that I would include Indiana in that as well because of their passing game. USC would be interesting because USC turns the ball over.
That's true. That's true. 5 turnovers last 2 games for the Trojans.
And any game that Illinois plays is going to have a limited number of possessions because of clock control. That's how they want to they want to shorten the game to make up for that margin in pure athleticism and talent. And that's not to say they aren't talented because Altmaier's good. The receivers, Bryant and Franklin, are really good, and their defense is fast and their secondary is fast. That's a good Illinois team, but they try to and when you play that style, your margin naturally is going to be thinner because of the style of play that they want to do.
You're absolutely right about that. And you're right. I think Illinois, good on you, because we didn't mention at the beginning. They deserve a lot of credit. They played really well, and they showed you right there. They can go up with the best of the best in tough road environments and not flinch. Maybe not come out victorious every time, but they're going to put up a fight like they did on Saturday night in Beaver Stadium.
And that's perfect because, we're going from concern or no concern to real or fake. I think Illinois is real. I really do. I think they're real, and they're a team that's going to be in the top 25 all year long.
Stay there, number 24. Did not fall out of the rankings there, like you said, and they have some opportunities here for some ranked wins coming up here in the near future as well, with Michigan coming to town here very shortly. Speaking of real or fake, how about Indiana? 5-0 for the first time since 1967. Do you see Kirk Cignetti before the game sent out a letter to all the students? Forget the tailgating, forget the studying. We need you there on Saturday to be loud. Oh, this guy is – I think the buy-in is real for Indiana. But let me ask you this, Trip, here. They're 5-0. When do the Hoosiers go from a fun story to a real contender in the Big Ten?
I think they are a real contender in the Big Ten. I think it's already transitioned to that. It's their best start since their Rose Bowl year in 1967. And it'd be one thing to be 5-0 and pull a couple of games out. They have been dominant in every game that they have played. They're averaging 513 yards per game. Opponents just 240, outscoring teams 244 to 65. They haven't allowed a point in the first quarter all year, and they have so many weapons on that offense. Obviously, Curtis Rourke, coming in from the MAC, has been really good, completing 73% of his passes this season, 11 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. But the players like an Elijah Sarrett in the passing game, who Kurt Cignetti brought with him from James Madison to Indiana, they're good. And I think they are already a legitimate contender in the Big Ten and perhaps for a spot in the college football playoff.
I want to see a little bit more just because you look at their schedule here. They have some games coming up that I think can be real good tests to see how good they truly are. I mean, at Northwestern, that should be a win. But Nebraska comes to town. We've sung Nebraska's praises, and they're kind of one of those top 30 teams on the outside looking in of the AP top 25. Washington at Michigan State, but then Michigan comes to town. If you're sitting there at 9-1, at maybe 10-0, after Michigan comes to town, clear at that point, obviously that's maybe you're in. But their last 3 games, Michigan, at Ohio State, and then Purdue, that 2-game stretch there, Michigan at Ohio State, I think they can really go 1-1. I think at that point, we're talking about, if you can handle business, which right now they've given you no reason to believe they can't, we could be talking about, realistically here, an 11-1 Indiana team, which we'll see how things go with Penn State, Oregon, and Ohio State and USC as well. Those 4 teams playing a lot against each other for the most part here. A lot of round robin a little bit. That could be good enough to be in Indiana or Indianapolis for the Big Ten title game.
It is crazy to think about. But when you mention that schedule, is there a game outside of at Ohio State that they won't be favored in. Like right now, them hosting Michigan, they may be favored in that game. And they had 48,000 fans at that game this last week. Like they are legit. Are they coming for you? Is that?
I guess so. The Hoosier Army is coming down to New York City to spread the word.
What did you do? If someone starts banging on your door next, then we really have a problem.
That'd be a good pod. Wow, we get James Franklin cursing on the air, and then I get me getting arrested off the podcast. That would be maybe our last podcast we do for a while here. But boy, that would be interesting for sure. But it's
who's got bail? Who would you trust to bail you?
Oh, not you. Not you for sure. Who would I trust? I don't think my girlfriend would bail me out either. I think she would enjoy the peace and quiet. One of my friends is in Miami. I haven't seen him in a while, so maybe he'll miss me enough. I think I'll call him. But it can't be anyone I've talked to recently. I think that, you, I think, would just put me right to voicemail. Maybe pull like a Phillies highlight on the phone as I'm trying to ask you, please bail me out. I can't be here in jail. My girlfriend will hang up the phone, probably not even answer when it's a collect call. Yeah. My list of bailouts is short. Would you call me? I'd bail you out.
I appreciate that.
Didn't answer the question. Okay. Look at that, folks. This guy, Brian Tripp here. Really, we got some good chemistry going on here. Jeez Louise. But you know what's also impressive about this game, Tripp, when they beat Indiana by when they beat Maryland, I should say, by 2 touchdowns, they lost the turnover battle 4-0. They gave the ball away a ton. Were very sloppy in this game, and it didn't come back to bite them like whatsoever. They still won comfortably. That's a sign of a high-flying, potent offense.
So you're in on real. Like they're legit.
Real. They're legit. They're absolutely legit. We were talking about them in absolutely the Big Ten championship conversation. No doubt about it.
What about Rutgers? Because of their schedule, they beat Washington 21-18. First 4-0 start since 2012. Obviously, Greg Schiano is revitalizing the program again and getting it back to where he had it. Their defense has been outstanding. They held Washington to just 10 points on 4 trips to the red zone. They're number 2 nationally in red zone defense. 4 touchdowns, 6 scores allowed in 11 trips to the red zone. Is Rutgers, they've won close. They've had to win close. But are they real?
I'm not there just yet. I will be after this week. They go on the road this week at Nebraska. I think it's a really, really good test for the Scarlet Knights team. And if they can come away victorious, I'm in. Because kind of similar to Indiana, you look at the rest of their schedule. I mean, they trip maybe outside of a road trip to USC on October 26th. They will be favored in every game. UCLA at home, Minnesota at home, at Maryland, Illinois at home, which could be, Illinois, Rutgers, second to last week of the season, could be one of the most impactful games of the season. 10-7 the final score. Take the under in that game without a doubt. But it's like kind of similar to Indiana. They have a very favorable schedule where I've got to look at the line this week against Nebraska. I'd imagine the Cornhuskers are a slight favorite. But other than that, Rutgers is going to be a favorite maybe in every game outside of at USC. This is real. I think, well, I'm going to say that. I think they need to prove this week, and if they win, I think they're real. I'm not there yet, but I'm close. How about you?
I think they're real, and Nebraska opened as a 6.5-point favorite for that game.
Okay.
I think Monangai, the running game, their physicality, the way they play defense, the Rutgers-Nebraska is going to be a lot like Illinois-Nebraska, and Rutgers is better running. Rutgers and Illinois are similar. Let's just put it that way. They're very, very similar in how they play. I like them to go on the road and win at Nebraska. I think they're real. I don't know that they need to prove it to me. And even if they came out of that game with a loss, I would expect it to be, if they were to lose, a close loss. I think they're for real. I think Greg Schiano's, I think he's got it going.
Now, you mentioned their defense, and it's been great, but what's been elite, their red zone defense. Number 2 in all the country in terms of red zone defense. They've allowed 11 trips to the red zone, 4 touchdowns, just 6 scores. So 6 scores, 5 stops in 11 red zone trips. So that's elite for Rutgers. Now, I will say the one thing with the Washington game that I think they did get lucky on, they get bailed out by some bad field goal kicking from Grady Gross. 1 of 4, missed a few chip shots here. The last one I'm not going to put on him was a 55-yarder. At that point, you missed 2 field goals. I don't think anybody believed he's going to hit that last one there to tie the game. But he goes 1 of 4, missed some what should have been relatively easy chip shots that we saw him make last year for Washington. They did get lucky. There was some bad field goal kicking from the Huskies. All right. Just want to throw that out there. All right. So you're
not changing my opinion. I think they're good. You're not changing my opinion if that's what you're trying to do.
You are in 2 feet on the ground in the Rutgers camp. I got like 1 foot. I'm dipping my toe in the water. I want to see how Saturday at Nebraska plays out first before I put both feet in and jump in the deep end here when it comes to the Scarlet Knights.
It's not a team that is real or fake, but we haven't talked enough, and it's because of who they played, about Ohio State. And it started a little slow against Michigan State, but they were dominant in that game as it went on. You can see all their weapons. Jeremiah Smith had a big game again. Their next 4 games against Iowa, at Oregon, bye week, home against Nebraska, at Penn State. It's very much assumed they're this good, but Will Howard, big test against Iowa next week. Their schedule is worth. Now we can start looking at Ohio State. It's kind of just been in passing because of who they've played. But I think that's a good thing, right? We don't talk about no concern with Ohio State because they've been so good at taking care of business. They haven't had that hiccup at all yet. But their next 4 games, I wanted to make sure we pointed out and at least talked a little bit about the Buckeyes because of how good they've been. Offensive line, right? They've been that good that you don't even consider bringing them up because they've taken care of business like they're supposed to, which is a testament to them. You can only play who's on your schedule. It's a testament to them.
I was going to say that's what elite teams do, right? They just they take a bad opponent and beat the brakes off of them, and that's what they've done at Akron, to Marshall, to Michigan State. They have not really made any game close or interesting, and we've seen Oregon make games closer than they should have been against lesser opponents. Ohio State, like you said, not talking about them so far through the first month of the season is actually a benefit and a testament to them because they've given no reason for us to talk about them because we know how good they are. I don't think we have to sing their praises after beating the brakes off Marshall, but we would definitely be talking about them if that's a close game in the fourth quarter. It's like, what the hell's going on here? So far, you're right. This is really where it kickstarts in for the Buckeyes. Let me ask you this: big 4-game stretch here. If I put the over/under win total at 3.5 for the Buckeyes in that 4-game stretch, taking the over or the under?
Under.
I would agree.
You're asking, are they going to go? You're asking, are they going to go unbeaten? 3-1.
That's right.
3-1. 3-1.
I would agree. At Oregon, at Penn State, Nebraska, Iowa, I think they go 3-1. I would say
I'm sticking with my preseason predictions.
Which were what? Who'd you have them losing to? Do you recall?
At Penn State. Had them losing at Penn State.
I will also stick with my preseason prediction. I had them losing to Oregon. I like the way Oregon's really bounced back. Again, speaking to the Ducks' credit as well, we've not talked about them in the last few weeks because they've really kicked it into gear, starting with Oregon State, and did what they were supposed to do on Saturday night against UCLA. Waxed them. Oof. Absolutely waxed them. So they right now are really starting to collect. That offensive line has gotten healthier. Now they're getting better as well. There's more balance offensively. That defense is starting to get, turn the corner as well. Oregon's really starting to hit their stride here going into October, which is huge with that game looming here in 2 weeks. That obviously, sure, please.
No. Go ahead. I insist.
Okay. I was going to say, speaking of college football playoff implications, right? We have Oregon and Ohio State in 2 weeks. Big one here. But we had some big time upsets in college football over the weekend, not in the Big Ten. Number 6, Ole Miss went down to Kentucky at home. Number 10, Utah went down with a backup quarterback, but still lost to Arizona at home. I think these have major impacts on the Big Ten trip because now I think the door is open for a team like USC to be firmly back in the college football playoff conversation. Because if you look at those 2 teams specifically that lost on Saturday, Ole Miss and Utah, I think there's real concern going forward of how they get back in. Ole Miss still has to play Georgia. And I have banged this drum before, and I'll do it again here. Even though it's a 12-team playoff and it seems, 10-2 is a guarantee to be in, I do think now who you beat matters. And if you're Ole Miss, 11-1 with the loss to Georgia is much more appealing than 10-2 with wins over, like the only two ranked opponents I have left, LSU and Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. Oklahoma's got a murderer's row schedule. They may be unranked pretty soon here. And LSU's kind of, they're okay. That may be a mid-teen win. If Ole Miss at the end of the year is 10-2 with let's say a win over a middle-teen LSU team, I don't know if that's good enough to make it. And for Utah, kind of the same thing here. They got problems at quarterback. The Big 12 is wide open as well. That might be a one bid conference. If they don't win the conference, I don't know if they're going to get an at-large bid. I think with USC's win over LSU already in their pocket here, I think USC for me is the biggest beneficiary of the chaos we saw with two top 10 teams going down.
No, I agree with that. And I think it's hard to believe that we're saying this, but Michigan also is a beneficiary. You just don't have the confidence in them to take care of it the rest of the year. You hit on the one thing that's most significant about those two games. And the other game that I was watching intently was Miami, because Utah losing, the Big 12 is really shaping up to be a one-bid league, whoever wins the conference. Had Utah run the table, then you lose your conference championship game. That's where a team like that sneaks in. Miami's interesting to watch because the ACC, if Miami wins the ACC and continues to have the year that they're having, it's a one-bid league, probably. If Miami stays in the top 10 all year and their only loss is the conference championship, Miami still makes it. So them losing, if they had lost that game on the crazy Hail Mary, Virginia Tech, I still don't agree with the call. If they lost that game, that would have put the ACC in a similar spot to the Big 12 as a potential one bid league. So it's, where are those bid stealers going to come? I think the Ole Miss one, it kind of knocks them down a peg, but but there's so many SEC teams there that are going to be playing top 5, top 10 games every single week. That one's not as significant as Utah. And then Miami winning also is super significant for the Big Ten in a game that looked like they maybe did lose.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I had no business winning. But also shame on me for not mentioning, because we just talked about this team. We're in on Indiana. 11-1 Indiana team is right there. Is like they're
Indiana, Rutgers, Illinois, Nebraska. All those fringe teams benefit from, the thought is Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State are all going to make it. Those fringe teams all benefit from that.
Absolutely. That was monumental. And Lane Kiffin has struggled beating good teams. If he can't beat Georgia, Ole Miss could be out, and Indiana could be saying, thank you very much, Mark Stoops in Kentucky. We're going to go on down. This is what a year we've had 1 month into the season, and we are legitimately talking about playoff bids possibly for Indiana, Illinois, Nebraska, USC, which
that's the beauty. That is the beauty of the new playoff. Teams that are in the top 25 or near the top 25 really feel like they have a chance as we approach October. Previously, once you got to mid-October, you were looking at 10, 15 teams max that really felt like they had an opportunity to play in the playoffs. It makes college football significant to so many more people later and later in the season. And yeah, Ohio State, Michigan still be a huge game. Your Penn State, Ohio State, your Oregon, Ohio State game is going to be big. But what it makes big is that game in a couple of weeks between Illinois and Michigan. Then all of a sudden that game is significant for a bunch of teams as opposed to just one or two. And I don't think it takes away from those big matchups either. I don't think that it's lessened to that. Did Alabama and Georgia, did it not feel important because of a 12-team playoff? No, it still felt like maybe the game of the year. It still felt like that. And that was the fear of the expanded playoff, is it's going to devalue some of the regular season. It has not at all so far.
It's the opposite. Like you said, we're talking about, Indiana, Michigan now as a possible playoff implication game. Like there are so many more games now with weight in terms of playoff positioning and playoff implications more than ever. I'm with you. This is the expanded playoff early on so far in the first month, I think, is really reaping benefits here and making now 30, 35 schools potentially, like, it makes their seasons actually meaningful instead of just kind of playing for a 9 or 10 win year and maybe getting a decent bowl game near January 1st. Mm-hmm. There are some real impactful games here. I think makes all the conference better.
I have a group chat of people, and obviously, I hope we come across as fair and unbiased on this, but I have a group chat going. I just looked down, and the question is, does Penn State have another kicker on its roster? So hopefully they listen to the Still Enrolled podcast this week.
Tell them you're the man with the answers. At least they're going to the right source. Asking you. Yeah, that's kickers, man. Can't live with them. Can't live without them.
Alabama somehow overcame a kicker all those years in the early Saban national championship years. They fixed that then, but that was always an Alabama knock.
You are right about that. You are right about that. Nick Saban figured out a way. Let's wrap up the pod here with this trip. Let's give some of our Big Ten rankings here. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming, to just kind of get housekeeping out of the way here, are the top three of, because going back to last week, we had the top three. We had the similar top three: Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon. Hot take alert here. Everyone sit down, brace yourself. Did anything change on that front for you, Trip?
No.
Okay. All right. How about rounding out the top five? Who do you have at spots 4 and 5? Who are your top 5 teams in the Big Ten outside of Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon?
Yeah, let me give you 4, 5, 6, 7. I think that's where.
Okay.
So USC, I have 4th, even though they fell to the team that I have 5th, Michigan. I have Indiana 6th, Rutgers 7th, then Illinois 8th.
Let me ask you this really fast here, because we've seen the AP poll do this. We've seen the college football playoff poll do this. What was the rationale with putting USC ahead of Michigan, despite obviously the head-to-head going to the Wolverines?
They had the signature win against LSU early. Their loss to Michigan was on the road, and then they played very well in the second half against Wisconsin this week, and Michigan has some real problems. If they played again, I think USC would be favored. In a neutral site right now, if you put them up head-to-head, I think USC would be favored, even though they just lost. I know it's more like power rankings instead of rankings for what their resume is and what they deserve. But I think USC has proven to be a more dangerous team than Michigan is right now.
It looks to be one of our biggest, maybe not biggest discrepancy. It's 2 spots, but we had pretty similar rankings last week, and a lot of agreement here so far this week. I have Indiana 4, Michigan 5, USC 6, Illinois 7, and then rounding out the top 8, if you will, Rutgers there. I know Indiana, again, the only thing I think you can say right now about Indiana is just the level of competition. They've really not played anyone of consequence. And again, you're only playing who's on your schedule, like you mentioned before. But the reason why I still want to believe in Indiana is they're blowing the doors off everybody. They are playing lesser competition, but making it known we are far superior than who we're playing. And they are, to me, at least right now, early on, leaving no doubt whatsoever. I'll reward that level of dominance over inferior competition and put them higher than both Michigan and USC, who easily have one, you could argue 2 better wins than the Hoosiers do.
That's the sign of a great team.
I agree. You're absolutely right about that. Who are your bottom 3 here?
In no particular order. I mean, I didn't really know how to order them, but UCLA, Northwestern, and Purdue are the 3 worst teams in the Big Ten.
Bottom dwellers. Yeah. I got Northwestern, UCLA, Purdue, 16, 17, 18. Those Purdue had Indiana State. That was a good run there, and they had a little bit of.
No one was impressed more than Ryan Hickey when they beat up on the Sycamores.
Thank God we didn't do Big Ten power rankings after week number 1, because I think we would have seen the biggest drop in the rankings of Purdue from maybe top 10 to bottom of the barrel in the conference there. Holy cow! Yeah, that was a swing and a miss. Swing and a miss by your boy. All right. that'll do it for this edition of Still Enrolled, the Big Ten Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you do subscribe wherever you get your pods and on YouTube as well. We got a big week 6 coming up here, so make sure you are subscribed so you get ready for big week 6 with us right here on the Still Enrolled Podcast. We'll talk to you on Thursday. Have a great week.